And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends who have been playing D&D for a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D is a funhouse that has a mind of its own.
Hi, I'm Ange, and I've been gaming for over 3 decades. I started with 1st edition and haven't stopped yet. I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a decade now, and I run the Gnomecast, the Stew's podcast.
I'm Jared, the review gnome at Gnome Stew, and I've been around long enough to see D&D brought to you by the letters A, B, E, C, M, and I, as well as the letters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. In addition to writing reviews at Gnome Stew, I've got my own site, whatdoiknowjr.com, where I write additional reviews and opinion pieces on a variety of RPGs.
You know, I'm really feeling like I'm not holding up the bar as far as the introductions go.
I don't know how long I can keep this up, so don't worry about it.
After we examine the games we're running in our campaign journals, we'll discuss Lair actions. Then, in our downtime research segment, we'll recommend some D&D related content for you to check out.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
In D&D 4e, traps and hazards had stat blocks similar to monsters. They often had a series of skill difficulties listed which had to be met to navigate or disarm the hazard or trap. Now in some ways, traps and hazards hybridized monsters and skill challenges. When traps and hazards appeared in encounters, they could roll initiative and be slotted into the initiative order. You know what that means. In the 4e version of the Tomb of Horrors, your whole party might actually get to act before the tomb tries to kill them. How novel.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
For me, we played the Poison Kingdom game in person! And as Chris will laugh at me, I was quite distracted getting to hang out with my friends in person while we game. There was still gaming that happened. It was probably a little better than the last time where I was completely flighty and just like, ooh, people. We got to poke around what was obviously an old museum with human relics. We also found that some pupper wizard had been living there to do research and had worked with the wizard Kiko had been apprenticed to. There were some messy traps and a cool hidden room, and we rested there, and it was pretty cool. From there, we continued on and eventually came across a horrifying monster of shadow and death and black, gooey, globular stuff. It had also raised a mammoth and had a whole bunch of zombies with it. This was a pretty fun fight in the middle of a shallow river.
Mm-hmm.
Bellana, my cleric, was able to run out into kind of the middle of things and do turn undead and make pretty much everything except for the big bad run away. We ended up fighting that big bad and took it out, and it turns out that was actually the guard captain we had been searching for. He had been killed and kind of turned into this monstrosity. And then as that is done, we're kind of like, because of course this only took like 2 rounds. We're like, do we want to do anything about the undead that are turned and running away? And we decided that we would let the normal zombies just run away, but we'd attack the mammoth because we didn't want that just running around loose in the world. So we attacked that and it was basically dead before it got back to us. We kind of left it as, I think we're going to continue on to see if we can figure out what's going on. But again, in person, distracted, I don't fully remember what we decided. In my other Saturday game, I am taking on the mantle of GM, and I am going to be running a Tales of the Valiant, Tales of the Old Margrave campaign. And this past Saturday, we did Session 0. I ended up pairing up the players and asking them to basically create backgrounds that were kind of closely connected to one another. I did this for a couple of reasons. One, I really wanted the players to have some established history that wasn't necessarily tied to the setting, and I'll get into that in just a moment. I also did it because I love these players, but some of them have some tendencies that frustrate me as a GM, and I felt like the pairings I gave them might counteract that a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've talked to them about this, and so they know it. This is nothing like, oh no, what has she done when they listen to this?
In the spirit of us randomly coming up with new topics in the middle of something else, we should probably talk about player types, because that shows up in like every GM book now and I don't agree with how they group people, but I have thoughts on it.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea.
Sorry, proceed.
So far, we have a celestial Siderian warlock who is looking to get out of his fiendish pact. Now, in Tales of the Valiant, Siderian is basically the term they've created to cover both Aasimar and Tieflings. They're kind of the same type of creature, just on a binary scale of celestial or fiendish. This fellow is a celestial, and he is bonded with a kobold wizard that he made friends with as he was trying to seek out potential solutions to his problem. Our kobold wizard has said he wants to be kind of a relic hunter, so imagine a kobold Indiana Jones who can cast fireball. We also have an elf druid and an elf-touched ranger from the Arbaness Forest. Elf-touched is basically this setting's version of half-elf, because Tales of the Valiant does not have a specific lineage for half-elf, so the character is, on paper, a human with an elf-flavored heritage.
Mm-hmm.
For all intents and purposes, she is a half-elf.
Yeah.
And they are bonded because they ended up becoming guardians of a sacred place in the forest, but then the ley lines told them that there were problems to the southeast, and they have set off on this journey to come to the Margrave Forest and find out what's gone. I've also created a nature spirit that is like a guiding force of them that'll get them to the point I need them to be to start the campaign. Because otherwise, like, we're wandering the forest. We have no reason to get together with these people. My players wouldn't do that, but just to cover our bases. Finally, we have a pair of cousins, a human fighter and a human rogue, that grew up in a small farming village along the outskirts of the Margrave. Their fathers are brothers that were adopted by a halfling family, meaning at some point I will get to play a very tough halfling grandma matriarch who takes no crap from anyone. I am so looking forward to that. I think we are pretty well set up for our first session. It's been a bit tough wading through the setting information for Midgard. Initially, I thought I could just get away with, ignoring it all and just using what's in the Tales of the Old Margrave book, but I should know my players better than that. They wanted more information, and I also ended up needing more information. And it is all very interesting stuff, but the way it is laid out and the way it is written is very dense.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of miss my Eberron books because most of the Eberron setting books were very good at giving you the elevator pitch of a thing and then diving into the details.
Yeah.
And the Midgard book just dives into the deep end. And I start reading a section and I'm like, what is going on here? And I have to say, Jared has been a godsend in that I can go to him and what's the deal with this? And he's been able to help me figure some stuff out since he has run multiple things in the Midgard setting.
Just as a aside, from a 5th edition standpoint, the Eberron campaign setting book is like the gold standard. Like every campaign setting book should be like that Eberron book that they put out for 5e.
I love Eberron. And as a side note, this is the opposite Saturday from the group I ran Depths of Centric for, and there is a very real possibility at some point this year I may be the GM for both Saturday games. That's gonna be a lot. I'm hoping we can avoid that for a while, but we'll see. I've already told TJ that I am going to run this one for a while, because he was doing the, why do I need to worry about this if we're only going to play for a level or two? And I'm just like, oh, come on, I'm not that bad of a GM. I'll get us through a few levels.
Well, let's see. Last week, my brain imploded because first off, I spent 3 hours prepping for our first Midgard session of 2025 after we've had 2.5 months when we haven't played. And when I opened my notes up, I had 2 paragraphs of that 3 hours worth of work. And I have improvised D&D sessions before, especially since I know what I was going to put into that. I would like to feel more confident than to just improvise it, but I could have. But that whole week was just terrible. My computer died. We had bad weather, so we were working from home. I had to drive in another day when it was bad weather and they didn't want to call work. That was the last straw for me that week. And it was like, guys, I can't. And I feel bad because now it's going to be another month because we have a scheduling thing right off the bat in 2025.
I think we all understood. It was still just like oh, okay. It really is the biggest monster in all of D&D is scheduling.
It definitely is. However, I did manage to pull together enough prep for my Curse of Strahd Saturday game. That is nice because we've been doing that, like, we're up to about 2 a month. Not necessarily every 2 weeks. Like this month, it's going to be 2 weekends in a row. And then it might be halfway through February, but we're still trying, shooting for those two weekends in a month. So we left our people just defeating all of the druids at Yester Hill, and I wasn't sure what direction they were going to go. I was going to get in touch with them, but then I realized they have a lot of stuff they had to sort through yet before they even decided to go anywhere, because they had a gemstone, they had the were-ravens that they had just freed. I also realized I have the were-ravens. I can, I have NPCs that can nudge them towards a place, and they need to take a long rest because I wouldn't let them get their level until they got a long rest. So it was like, hey, go to this cabin, relax. The DM will throw some plot hooks at you. So the two main plot hooks they're kind of following up on is Baba Lysiga, who is the witch that was Strahd's nursemaid, has one of these gemstones that went missing. And the other thing that they've been looking for is the Amber Temple, which is supposed to have a weapon that they can use against Strahd. So since the were-ravens have been everywhere in Barovia, we got out the map of Barovia. I showed them, because the NPCs were showing them, this is where the Amber Temple is. This is where Baba Lysiga probably is. What would you like to do? And they could have gone and met with Baba Lysiga first and then gone to the Amber Temple because it was along the way, but they do not want to deal with someone that was Strahd's, that raised him, that is like the prime witch in Barovia. They decided they would rather go to a dungeon complex than do that.
I mean, I can't blame them there.
So I've been doing this thing where not every single time they take a long rest, but every 2 or 3 times they take a long rest, I've been coming up with like customized dreams for these characters that is pulling in some of the stuff from their backstory. And I've been having way too much fun with this, and it freaks them out, so it's great. One of the most recent things was that our changeling blood hunter, she was the only one that didn't have a dream, and she literally had nothing. Like everything was completely blank to the point to where she couldn't wake up and she was in nothingness. And that was all she experienced.
Ooh.
And her character freaked out a little bit, and they had to use calm emotions on her, or else she would have been incapacitated for an hour. We had a bunch of other dreams that kind of tied into other people's backstories. One of our spellcasters trained with Mordenkainen before he got thrown off into the wilderness and went insane. She's basically having guilt over not finding him and helping him now that he has been wandering the woods like a madman. So it's been interesting to to twist the knife on some of these players after they gave me something to stick the knife into in session 0. Because I don't think Liz listens to this, I will throw out there the reason that the changeling saw absolutely nothing in their dreams is because Azalin is just taking their soul out and hiding it somewhere so no one can find it at night. So while they're sleeping, they don't have a soul. When you make a warlock pact with Azalin, it's probably, you should probably expect bad things are going to happen. There's a gatehouse that leads to the mountain where the Amber Temple is at. They made it to that gatehouse and they ran into a pair of rocks, vulture demons. And it happens a lot of times, and it's cool because I like this ebb and flow. But like in the beginning, they're starting to get their butts kicked, and then they realize what they can do, and then they kind of surge back, and they aren't having people drop every other round. For some reason, both of our arcane spellcasters took Mote of Hell as a spell. Mote of Hell is a third-party spell, but it is basically Hunger of Hadar because Hunger of Hadar isn't in the SRD.
Oh.
But it is instead flavored to be opening up a portal to hell that traps somebody within it. I kind of like that because opening up a portal to hell feels a little more gothic horror than Lovecraftian horror, and I think that works better with Curse of Strahd anyway.
Yeah.
Now I need to pick through the Amber Temple and see what I want to highlight and what I want to modify, because that is another thing. And we've already had this topic, but like when you run a published adventure, I don't understand when people think that you just run it exactly as it is out of the book, because I do not do that. It keeps me focused, but I'm still changing things and modifying them and, customizing it to the group.
Oh yeah, you got to customize it to your players. You got to acknowledge the aspects that are going to be good for your group and which are going to be annoying for your group or bad for your group, and change them up.
If nothing else, like, this is, again, something we talked about, but like, I know our red, yellow, green topics now, and there are things in Curse of Strahd that I have to get rid of or modify, because Curse of Strahd has a lot of heavy things of various types that you would think of in Gothic horror. So
yeah.
Also, apparently now I need to go see Nosferatu, because 2 of my players have seen it and they're throwing out references, and I cannot have them throwing out references I do not understand.
I hear it's good.
Yeah, I want to see it, so we shall see.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
One of the new rules developments that came about in D&D 5th edition was the Lair action. Almost everything that can be done has been done somewhere in D&D over the last 50 years, but 5e standardized the concept of a monster lair that had effects that go off at a certain initiative count. We wanted to take a look at lair actions, what they can bring to your game, what they can do for you, and when you should or shouldn't use them. So Ange, what exactly is a lair action?
So in general, lair actions are things that happen in the environment in an area that a dangerous monster controls. They're something that complicates the fight and challenges the characters in a way that is not solely dependent upon the adversary itself. They were formalized in the 2014 Monster Manual as an aspect of legendary monster write-ups. So they were mostly attached to things we would consider the big bad, that would have a lair that the players were going into to deal with said big bad monster.
Also, maybe worth noting that from some of the previews they've shown us in the 2024-25 Monster Manual, monsters that are legendary have not had lair actions in the previews that they have shown.
Oh.
Which I am not happy about, but if you still want lair actions, you can get the Monster Vault for Tales of the Valiant, and those things still have lair actions there, so...
And there's also some other resources you can do.
Oh yeah, and we'll get into some of those. Have you had a particularly memorable moment with lair actions, either as a DM or as a player?
So the first time I tried using lair actions was with the Rot Troll and the bridge in the Depths of Zendrick campaign, and that was okay. It wasn't super memorable, but I was kind of getting used to it. But the second time was the Medusa lair. This was a ton of fun because I had built up that this cult of Yuan-Ti had been kidnapping people to turn them into brood guards and all of this, and there were some people they were trying to rescue, so they're making their way into this, this whole underground lair, and they're fighting the Yuan-Ti, and then they realize there's something more going on deeper in, and they get down in there and they realize it's a Medusa. And there's these statues that it's this long hallway leading up to her area. And there's these statues lining it that they realize are adventurers who had been turned to stone by her at some point. And of course, my players are smart. My players are tactical. They use those statues as cover. Well, one of the lair actions that this Medusa had was that on the initiative order that the lair could act, some of these statues would come to life momentarily and make an attack on an adversary, basically an opponent that was within 5 feet of it, which means every single one of my players that was using one of those statues as cover got walloped by the statue itself, which completely changed the whole dynamic of the fight. One of the players was playing a Blade Singer Bard mix. He was a glass cannon. Incredible damage, really hard to hit, but once you hit him, he went down. And he went down like a bag of rocks. And so they had to pull him out of that fight and get him out of the way. Meanwhile, they've got the Medusa coming around the corner to try and get them to meet her gaze. Although I did run into the issue with that fight that the Medusa's effective range of her gaze really short.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, this does not narratively fit what I thought I was dealing with. So, I mean, we kind of fudged it, but it still ended up being a pretty memorable fight.
Oh, yeah.
To the point that my players were so mad at her because she ended up running away. Better form of valor and all that to run if you know you're going to lose the fight. So they ran away. So they ended up creating a trap for her with all of their copper that they left in a chest they had trapped with a mirror so that when she opened it, she'd be faced with a mirror to show her her own reflection.
I remember you telling me about that.
And like they left a note in there saying, suck it. You know when your players hate an adversary, you did something right as a GM.
Yes. There is players hating to deal with them, and there is players emotionally invested in seeing them defeated.
Yes.
I was going to mention, I have a few that I really liked, but I was going to save some of my customized ones for later in the discussion and just go with an actual monster's lair actions. But the funny thing about this is about the Aboleth fight that we had in the water tunnel. Actually, its lair actions were pulled from like 3 different sources because I did not like a single one of them. Like, I didn't quite like the 2014 Aboleth lair actions. So then I looked in the Level Up 5e Aboleth thing, and I liked some of the things from there. So I basically cut and pasted multiple lair actions together to get the Aboleth that I actually wanted. I liked that one just because it felt like it was... Aboleths can have a problem with being mobile enough and not just being a big tentacle fish that people can like get up next to and start wailing on. So the lair actions and everything kind of helped it move around and create illusions that gave it a chance to do things. And I really like that. And I guess in my head, I can still picture that cavern that everybody was jumping around on, and the fact that Marin actually had to trigger his psionic jump to get, to close the distance with the Aboleth while it was getting away. I enjoyed that one.
I remember Marin with that one being in the water with the Aboleth at one point and being like, it's fine, citizen. I can handle this. And we were all very much like, no, you cannot handle this. You need to get out of there.
Oh, goodness. What function would you say lair actions have in the game?
I don't know if this is officially what they do, but as the way they function, they spice up a fight.
Mm-hmm.
They can take a bog standard boss fight and turn it into something a little more interesting. They can take it from being whatever bad guy they're fighting is a sack of hit points that you hit until they're all gone, to something where the players need to think a little more critically and be aware of their surroundings a little more. I think it can also really help literally bring the environment to life. Because if you do it right, it's basically helping flesh out the location the players are in, or the characters are in, and what's happening and what's going on.
A lot of advice that I have seen has been like, when you design really memorable combat encounters, you should make sure that the terrain is interesting, that there's like something you could push somebody into and ledges people can fall off of, and reasons to do things other than just walking up to people and hit them. Even when you do that, sometimes people still have a tendency just to go up to the thing and hit it. But the lair actions are still saying, no, this thing is still going to do something to you.
Yeah.
So do you think that lair actions should grant special actions to the monster, or should they be more about the environment?
I absolutely believe they should be more about the environment itself, because you need to be careful, because some of these monsters will also have legendary actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you want to be careful about having legendary actions on top of lair actions and so forth. Because then you've got the monster doing its turn, it's legendary actions that it can trigger at certain points, and then the lair actions going on another turn. Now, this could be a perfectly fine way of taking a solo combatant and turning it into an interesting fight, because that is a problem in most RPG combats. But I think you need to be very judicious about how you employ all of it together, because it could be very overwhelming if you're not careful.
The reason I brought up this question in the first place is I have seen some monsters that their lair action will do something like, now they can use their breath weapon again. It's like, I don't like that, because that's not a lair action to me now.
Yeah.
I understand the point of that is saying you are fighting it in its lair, therefore it's more dangerous. But to me, the lair action should be the environment acting. Like, it shouldn't just be the monster gets to do extra things because it's in its lair.
I agree. That sounds more like something that should be a legendary action.
Yeah.
You know, like with its legendary action, it gets to recharge its breath weapon.
Right.
Whereas the environment is this big ass red dragon you're fighting. All of a sudden, a shoot of lava comes flying through the room that you got to dodge.
Yeah. And that is the way I'm picturing this. And I'm not even saying like the monster shouldn't change their environment so that things beneficial to it will happen. I'm just saying they shouldn't be things that are giving the monster something extra that they get to do. It should still be the environment doing it.
Yeah.
If that red dragon has set up a bunch of steam vents to go off every so often in a fight, which won't hurt it, but it'll hurt the people it's fighting, yes, the dragon did that, but it's still the environment causing those things to go off. I think it's a fine line sometimes, but it's just the fact that I have seen some lair actions that lean more heavily on, oh, you're fighting it in its lair, so now it can do this too. I don't like that.
Yeah, I'd rather have it be an issue with the lair itself.
Now, we'll get into this later, but part of this is also because I like the concept of the environment, even if it's not directly tied to the monster too.
Yeah.
So what would you say makes a good lair action?
I think in general, these should be a combination of things that surprise the players and their characters, changes the battlefield up somewhat, and it makes the location feel lived in and real for that setting.
Most lair actions are written too, where they're saying you can't have the same one happen two rounds in a row. So at the very least, you're going to be cycling through some of these.
Yeah.
I have a few times when I'm using like actual official lair actions. There's sometimes the third one just isn't like, this isn't interesting at all, or, you know, this won't work.
If I remember correctly, the Medusa had the one lair action that caused petrified statues to basically reach out and attack something near it, for swarms of snakes to appear to bite the characters, and for the Medusa herself to be able to use the shadows to go into hiding.
Yeah.
And the way the room was set up where they were fighting her, the last one was completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Because she was around a corner and she would use half her movement to step in line of sight, do her thing, and then step out. You know, she never had an issue where she needed to use that part to get away. And then she just ended up using, I don't remember if it was Misty Step or something, to get GTFO out of the lair to run away from the players. But I did use the other two. And of course, after the first time that the statues hit them, they were never close enough to a statue to be hit again to use that one again. So
I don't necessarily want to say that you shouldn't do something like damaging people, because sometimes it does shake people up to realize, oh, we're not just taking damage from this thing. We need to get this done, because otherwise the environment's going to kill us too. But I don't think that's the primary thing that I always want. I just want it to change the circumstance, or to force people to realize that something might happen.
Yeah, I would take a look, like especially if you want to create your own lair actions, take a look at the conditions that are in the book, and you can do things like it makes the ground difficult terrain, or they need to make a dex save or be prone, or various other things, like a smoke cloud billows into the room and obscures everyone's line of sight. And you can do things that don't necessarily harm the characters, but still change things up that make them have to think on their feet.
This goes into something that I really like about monster design that I don't see a lot of monsters necessarily do. But I like it when a monster can do something different if someone has a condition on them, because that also feels dynamic to me. So if you have a lair action that can inflict the condition that that monster is waiting for, I think that's an interesting interaction.
Oh, you know what would be cool? Something with tentacles? Hang on, I'm going someplace with this. Something with tentacles where the lair action has an effect that could make the characters go prone, and once the character's prone, the tentacle can grab them and lift them up by their feet. And now they're kind of held and they've got to get out of that. And like, this is cool.
This is what I like about lair actions. And honestly, I think that's the thing that we're always trying to solve in D&D, because in epic fantasy, you always have like that one giant or that one dragon or that one demigod that can fight an entire party of people. And in D&D, unless that thing is like 10 CR higher than it should be, your PCs are probably going to roll lucky and kill it.
Yeah, like I said, the solo monster can be tough if you're not careful.
That's another thing. If you can justify it with the environment, I am not against the environment healing the monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea that you could have a lair that will rejuvenate the creature because that's how it's been set up. And this is, that's different to me than just giving the monster extra stuff.
Typical video game design is if the lair has something within it that is healing the adversary, and if you destroy it, that gives you the advantage.
Yeah.
Thinking of like multiple fights in Veilguard that I've just gone through, and there's a fight with a certain hag in Baldur's Gate 3 where you need to deal with the things or she just keeps coming back.
If you don't know what that fight is, I'm just going to say that I got a hold of Ange after that fight because it took me like 2 hours to get through it, and there was cussing. I was very mad at that encounter. But the environment definitely plays a part in that encounter.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that is a thing. If there is one thing that I think has been deficient in a lot of lair action design, is that I do like the idea of building in something that the PCs can do to interact with the lair action to change it. And I'm going to kind of get into that when we talk about custom lair actions. But yeah, I like that idea. Like you're saying, like if you can get to this thing, you can destroy the thing that's healing it on initiative count 20 every time. So, having said that, I think you mentioned this before. Have you ever done much to customize a lair action? I know you said you didn't make one from scratch, but have you ever tweaked one or?
Yeah, I haven't really done that too much. I did try and build up the environment of the Cloister of Larok in the Depths of Zendrick campaign, but it didn't quite do what I wanted, and I wouldn't call it lair actions, because that was more of a straight up fight against the fire giant. I think it was a fire giant berserker that was trying to do bad shenanigans that they had to deal with while there were other fire elementals around and all of that, but that wasn't necessarily a lair action. And then the second part of that fight with it wasn't a fight. The second part of that, where they explored the area where the quarry was imprisoned, that was not a fight. That was the quarry basically messing with them and then going on about its business because it didn't need to deal with these insects anymore.
So when we had our Midgard game where they were traveling the plains and they had to go to multiple planes to collect various things, to go to the prison plane and convince the Yugoloth there to let the Valkyrie free, I built specific lair actions for each of the planes that they were on. And there were 4 creatures in those planes, but I also wanted them to be themed to the planes that they were on. So like the Einherjar that they fought in Valhalla, there was lair actions over the battlefield where the Einherjar would fight day in and day out. That would randomly give a benefit to people where it might heal them, or it might cause them to go into berserker rage, or it wasn't necessarily bad things. It was just things that a plane of Norse warriors fighting each other for eternity to practice for Ragnarok. It's those things that would randomly come up and say, hey, I know you're a spellcaster, but you really want to hit this guy with a weapon right now.
That was fun. Because it was like, is this going to help me or is this going to hurt me? Because sometimes it helped you and sometimes you were screwed.
Yep. It was also fun because everyone got to die in that encounter, but it was Valhalla, so it didn't matter that everyone died in that encounter. And then I had another one for the plane with the undead in it, where like there would be like this moaning that would steal memories out of people and just generally did psychic damage, which in that case I kind of like the psychic damage there because it's like you're in a plane where you have undead lamenting the horrible things they did in life. That kind of strikes me as when you see like what a serial killer gets to see, like what he's tormented with for the rest of eternity, that would probably do psychic damage to you if it hits you in the brain. There was another one that I made that I really liked, and I want to see what Ange thinks of it, but this is going to get into something that I wanted to talk about because it is a lair action that really wasn't about the monster. It was literally about the room that the monster was in. I think that there is a lot of design space for that. Maybe the technical term isn't lair action in that case, but there is something about this location is special. It might be filled with a bunch of mooks, but the location is special, so it is going to be going off and enhancing this area or changing it in some way.
Yeah, no, I think that is a very cool thing, and the term lair action probably isn't correct because it's not the lair of a monster, but it is an environmental action.
Yeah.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, it's that idea that it triggers on an initiative count.
Yeah, like something happens regardless of what the PCs are doing, and they have to adjust to it. I think there was one aspect of that ended up being a bit problematic, because if I remember correctly, like we ended up like in a hole under the floor.
Yep.
With 0 hit points, and it was like, oh, this did not go the way that was expected.
It was interesting. It evolved in an interesting way, but I liked what it was doing.
Oh yeah, the idea was fantastic. It was just certain aspects didn't jive with the reality of play.
What's funny is we were just discussing like a custom lair action as we were talking about having fights that don't have just combat as your thing, and talking about maybe having something in the environment where you can shut off part of a lair action or whatever. It just occurred to me that I remember this one encounter that was very short that was like a triceratops has been chewing on this weed that makes it hallucinate and it attacks you, which was a way of basically saying, yeah, I know it's an herbivore, but we want you to fight a triceratops. But what that got me to thinking of is you could do a lair action for that, where on the initiative count, the triceratops has to see if it's hallucinating, whether it's going to charge you or not. And you could potentially lead that triceratops out of the range of this thing to where it's getting fresh air and it can breathe again. It just struck me that would be kind of a cool encounter where it's like, I don't want to kill this thing, but it's going to keep fighting us until we figure out how to either get rid of the thing that's affecting it or get it to a safe area.
Yeah.
I like stuff like that. It's kind of cool.
No, that is a very cool idea. So I definitely think you can and should take the concept of lair actions and apply them to certain environments to add a bit of flavor and interest to things, because not everything needs to be a punch 'em up fight.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. Your players want to go punch evil in the face. Unless they're sociopaths, in which case, why are you playing with them? But if all they are ever doing is punching evil in the face, that's going to get boring. That's going to be a problem. So you want to change things up and keep things interesting for them.
And they're going to remember that time that they had to make grappling checks on a triceratops to try and pull it into a different area so it wasn't fighting them. More so than just, oh, triceratops charged you, now you get to fight it.
Oh yeah, my players are like still talking about that Medusa fight.
Oh, definitely. We already kind of talked about this. I'm setting this up so I can talk about my thing, but have you ever used a lair action that isn't exactly tied to a monster, and how did you use it?
I don't think I have ever specifically done this, other than, like I said, I tried to do some stuff in the Cloister of Lorok that didn't quite work how I wanted them to. I have done stuff in the Eberron campaign where it was the field has a property where they need to start making will saves, or they just want to go to sleep and then they will die there.
Yeah.
and be eaten by the plants or something horror jungle like that.
Oh.
But nothing specific.
By the way, there may be a part in the Margrave campaign where there is a patch of hallucinatory spores, so that'll be fun.
Puppies! Puppies!
What we were alluding to was I had this one dungeon that was constantly shifting, and so basically I had rooms, but the rooms weren't connected in any specific way because the dungeon reconfigures itself. I 100% was inspired by two things when I made this dungeon. One was 13 Ghosts, and the other is the one mansion in Dishonored, where like you pull the lever and the whole thing shifts around, and those were the things that I was going for with this dungeon. There is a vault that had really important stuff in it, and the vault was being guarded by an Eldritch Lich, which is basically a warlock lich that has tentacles growing out of its chest.
He was creepy.
He was fun though. That vault had Lair actions, but they had nothing to do with that Eldritch Lich. It wasn't because he was in that location and he changed anything. It wasn't that his nature warped anything. The vault was the vault. It would have done this no matter what, but it was sort of a Lair action because he showed up there to guard that vault. Basically what we had happen was, for the Lair actions, something would happen, floor tiles would realign, and different effects would happen. Like one of them was like saw blades would come up out of the floor, so you'd have to make a dex save to jump over the saw blades before they cut into your feet. The one that we were talking about before was I had one where it dropped into a pit. And the whole point was just like, oh, you dropped into a pit, you'll take some falling damage. But the character dropped into the pit after the Eldritch Lich hit them with a spell, and they were already at 0 hit points, so they fell into the hole, and they couldn't climb out before the next Lair action. So in theory, that means the floor closed up over them. So they were stuck under the floor until the next Lair action happened. And then they couldn't crawl out themselves. They had to have somebody heal them before they could crawl out of the...
Womp womp womp.
I don't even know that was bad. It was not what I was expecting to have happen because I wasn't expecting to knock somebody to 0 hit points like on the first turn. The Eldritch Lich got lucky there.
Sometimes the bad guys get a good hit in.
I mentioned like the planar ones, but I also did a thing, and I think it kind of worked. I think it needs to be tweaked, but it kind of worked. We did a thing when everyone was in Set's domain where I had very nasty weather effects that would go on for like 3 or 5 rounds. And the weather effect would go off on initiative count 20, and everybody could do whatever they were going to do to prepare for it when it happened. And they just had to make it through the 3 rounds or the 5 rounds. And I was doing that because I think sometimes exploration in D&D seems to be the thing that we zoom out and make a single check about and then say we're done, or it is what we declare in hindsight when we find things. And I wanted that to be more of a active thing, like where people can actually use endure elements for trying to resist lightning that was going to hit them.
Travel and that type of broader exploration ends up with a problem where it is either too zoomed out and you don't get the sense of actually being in the environment and doing stuff, or too zoomed in where it starts getting tedious.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's probably a place for being able to say, you're in very cold weather, you don't have cold weather gear, give me a constitution save. You failed, you have a level of exhaustion. We didn't roll an encounter for today, so you get a long rest, your level of exhaustion goes away. So you just went through a whole bunch of stuff that sort of tells a story that is ultimately meaningless.
Yep.
And I just wanted to have more of a round by round thing. And plus, part of that is you should be able to do things like teleport out of the way of a lightning bolt, or cast shield if something is, if hail's about to hit you, things like that. But that never comes up when you zoom out and say, oh, weather is happening. Make a save to see what the weather did to you. That was my attempt to try and make that a little bit more active so that people could use their abilities in a non-combat situation that was still dangerous.
And I think it helped reinforce the idea that we were in a very different location. This is not Kansas anymore.
I don't think I would do that for every weather. That was just that Set's domain has very extreme weather that is literally trying to kill you. I like that. If they named it something different, like an active hazard or something, I don't know what a good name would be other than Lair action. Although I will say, since the 70s, we have been using the term dungeon for everything that is underground that is absolutely not a dungeon. So I think we can get
Heck.
away with still using lair action for this one. It's not a monster's lair.
It doesn't even need to be underground.
Yeah.
It just needs to be a structure.
Yeah. Are there rooms? It's a dungeon.
Yep.
Do you have any additional sources for lair actions?
I'm going to let you talk about home field advantage because you are the one that pointed me towards it. But I'm going to riff off of what you said about the vault and how you kind of took inspiration from Dishonored.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you play video games, you have dealt with lair actions.
Oh, yeah.
As I was talking about the hag fight, well, one of the hag fights in Baldur's Gate 3, I also got thinking about the Iron Throne. I'm not going to say too much about it because it is a part 3 fight. It's not a fight, but a part 3 thing you need to do that is pretty much all lair action.
Mm-hmm.
It is a location you need to go in and do something and get out before it falls around you. And the difficulty level that you're playing on changes how much time you have to do it. And it's tough. It is tough to do it correctly. And there are certain things that happen in there that are like, oh, okay, what's going on? I will say, depending upon which character you bring and send where can cause problems. There was an area where there was oil leaking, and I happened to send Karlak down that way, and Karlak has some fire issues, and she ended up setting the oil on fire and causing all sorts of collateral damage that I did not intend. This is something you can do in a video game. I reloaded many times because I was going to do that damn thing perfectly. That's the type of thing that there are actions that you can do to basically help the fight that you can get out of video games that you can use in your tabletop games. In Veilguard, this isn't exactly a lair action, but it's something that can make the fight a little more dynamic. In Veilguard, there's a couple of different fights where the main antagonist you're dealing with is protected by some sort of thing, and you need to deal with the things that are protecting them before you can attack that antagonist. And of course, the longer you wait, the more things start coming at you.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden they realize every round we don't do something, this thing over here is spitting out another zombie. Okay, we need to deal with that thing so we're not continually being swarmed by zombies.
Yeah.
You know, you can do things like that. So take a look at your video games. They don't necessarily translate one-to-one to your tabletop, and so you need to be mindful of that. But some of the ideas and concepts can be very interesting at your table.
Yeah, and before I get to the literal product that I was going to point people towards, I've been playing way too much of Marvel Rivals. But even in like a hero shooter game like that, there are different environments that change based on who controls an area or how long you've been in an area. Like on the Wakanda map, if you take over certain rooms, there are like animal spirits associated with that room, and it will either enhance healing or the people that don't have control of it can't see. Like there's like this fog that shows up that, you know, that you can't see through. So there's these little things that are like, you know, once somebody has control of this area, it is triggering this other thing that changes the effects for people. Then there's another map where the central platform lifts up. So anybody that is on that central platform is still on that platform, and they're not getting any support from anybody. So if there's like two people from two different teams up there, they're fighting each other, and that's it until it drops back down again. So, you know, even things like that are some things to keep in mind. And, you know, like Ange said, you can't necessarily build these things to work exactly the way they do in video games. But I think there are so many good inspirations from that you can see, like, this is the type of thing that could change. The other thing that I will say is look through some 4th edition D&D stuff, because there were actually a lot of encounters, because they were very big on building out encounters in the adventures. You know, they would actually show you the map and where everybody started. Things like traps and hazards were often part of those things, and sometimes they had initiative counts, and they were in certain areas. There were some maps where if you are standing in a certain location, you are more likely to crit. things like that I think are kind of inspirational that you can bring forward to do something similar. Maybe not exactly what it did in 4th edition because it's not the same game.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some really good ideas in some of those encounters. So if you have the opportunity to look through some 4th edition adventures, I would recommend looking through some of those because there were some really neat things there. I like the idea of traps that have an initiative count, where it's not just, this thing is going to keep going off on initiative count 20 until we get it disarmed. And it's not just making one check. It is, I have to go here, here, and here to shut it down. It feels a little bit more Indiana Jones then.
Anything to make it a little more interesting.
So the product that I was going to mention is Home Field Advantage. It is from the DM's Guild. Basically what it is doing is it gives lair actions to just about every monster that doesn't have them in the original monster manual. So basically it's saying, hey, if you want a fight to be momentous with a goblin chief, you can still do that, where you have something interesting going on when you're fighting the goblin chief in their throne room. And it is not just good for adding it to those specific monsters. It's really good for looking at components of different lair actions that you might take something from this lair action, take something from this one, and build your own just by mixing and matching what they've given to different monsters. I would highly recommend getting it.
That is where I got the lair actions for the Medusa and the Rot Troll. Because, as I said at the very beginning, the 2014 Monster Manual really only had lair actions tied to legendary level monsters.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, yeah, I want them there, but they already have their legendary actions. I wanted them more for other mid-level bosses. I've said this before in the past. Don't treat your dragons and your big other monsters like fine china.
Yeah.
Where you only bring them out on special occasions, because if your D&D campaign is like many other D&D campaigns, you're never going to get to the point where you get to pull out the fine china. So bring in stuff more regularly to make things interesting. You can still have that boss battle at level 3 be just as exciting and interesting as the one you have at level 15. Just maybe less breath weapons.
I will just say this. As someone that loves giants, if you happen to run Storm King's Thunder, please give your giant chieftains legendary actions and lair actions. Because that was so weird that you have these very big, important giants, and they are not legendary. They're not really. They're just giants with slightly more hit points than the other giants. When I ran it, I did give them lair actions and legendary actions. And also, this book can help you with that. It is 240 pages. It is a lot. It also, I was saying it was the monster manual, but it also has things from Tome of Foes and Volo's Guide to Monsters, neither of which are still in print, but you still can get those lair actions for the monsters that used to be in those things that no longer exist. But also, this is one of the DM's Guild things that is set up that you can get it print on demand, so you can actually get it as a hardcover too. That is kind of cool. There's also a Roll20 version of it, and what that will do is basically on your regular screen, it will add a little thing that you can drag onto the map and click on it, and that will have the lair action take its action. That's kind of neat. It's handy. I actually repurposed a few of those and rewrote them to run my lair actions when we were doing the planar one. I am actually surprised that we have not seen something that has lair actions from anybody else. I'm sure there is some out there somewhere, but there's not like a Kobold Press thing. There's not like a Nord Games thing.
Yeah.
Like Nord Games did a gigantic book on traps, but not on lair action. I would love to see somebody get in that space and do it. Maybe with some of the like supplementary things that Cubicle 7's been doing for 5e, they would do that in something. I don't know.
Stop sleeping on lair actions, folks.
Especially if Wizards isn't going to use them. I wonder too, though. I wonder if it's not a matter of they're not going to have them, but it's going to be like a generic thing in the beginning of the book saying you can give this a lair action. It will do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Instead of detailing one for each monster.
Yeah, because I suppose there are times where it's like that black dragon that stumbles across your camp and you fight.
Right.
Isn't going to have any lair actions because it's attacking you in your campsite. But if you go to that black dragon's lair, there might be some lair actions there. So it's probably better to not have it tied to the monster manual entry.
Yeah.
but it probably should at least be a side note there.
Yeah.
If they fight it in its home, here's what it can happen.
And just for a brief moment, I'm going to do a tangential thing because we didn't even talk about this, but there are regional effects that are often tied to these monsters too. I used to not pay much attention to them. When we were going through the Book of Many Things and they had like a tier 3 rogue villain in there, one of the regional effects for that rogue villain was that poisons are more effective as long as this guy is in charge of this territory. And I was like, wow, that is a neat concept. I never even thought about that because I'm thinking of stuff like, oh, plants won't grow within this many feet of, their lair or things like that. No, that is a neat thing that actually literally changes how a region works because this person is in charge of it.
Yeah.
Now that we've looked at all of that, when shouldn't you use a lair action?
When you've been overusing them. If you have given every single monster your players have fought a lair action, it's going to get boring. It's going to get expected. Sometimes you want to fight with a horde of goblins to just be a fight with a horde of goblins. You don't want to treat this as like fine china where you only bring it out for the specialist of occasions, but you still want to have it be a nice occasion.
Yeah.
You still want to have it be an interesting, good time, special thing that happens. I say good time, special thing when you're hitting people with undead adventurers who've been turned to stone or getting sucked into an aboleth charnel pit. But it's like it should be a special thing that happens.
Yeah.
You don't want to overuse them.
Yeah, I agree. And it actually made me think of something too. Like, there might be times when something has legendary actions that you don't want to give it because it's just there to do a thing. It's there to be intimidating. It's kind of like the sub boss when it's not really the boss monster, but you want your sub boss to be kind of intimidating. You could just take those those legendary actions off of a thing. But yeah, you can definitely overuse something. And that was one of the things I was trying to do thematically for that planar adventure. It's only going to happen in this major encounter, but it is going to give you a feel for what this plane is like. So it wasn't things that were happening when you run into undead out in the middle of nowhere. It was when you were in that specific cave tracking down that one specific undead that wanted to be thrown into the void so he didn't exist anymore. It's a unique motivation, but
we're still not even sure if that worked for him. He may just be falling through the endless void of space going, crap, my brain is still here.
Yep. I mean, I won't confirm that, but that's definitely a possibility. I think we have hit our lair actions several times there. I think we've covered a lot of what we wanted to say about it.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
So heading into downtime research, in every episode, we'll find something related to D&D that we want to share with you. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something we think will enhance your D&D experience. First, though, our Eldritch Invocation. We have a Patreon. If you're enjoying our show and would like to help us produce it, we'd love to have you join. Supporting us helps keep the show going and expands the content we create and share on the Patreon. There are regular releases over there on the Patreon, often related to the Heroes of the Havel's Way campaign. In addition, we have a Discord where we're happy to chat with you about all things fantasy gaming. It's patreon.com/Thac0WA. Now, moving on into the thing I wanted to give a shout out to. Speaking of Kobold Press, since I am running a Tales of the Valiant game, it is only fair that I point out that they are currently running a Kickstarter for their Monster Vault 2, which may very well have lair actions in it. More monster goodness. And it's also worth pointing out that they have announced they've got a book about the Margrave coming out in April. I'm not sure if it's going to be a direct retread of the book they've already produced and updated for the new system, or if it's going to be new material for the region. Either way, I will be watching it because we'll probably only be to about 3rd level.
I think they called it like a campaign setting book, so it's not. I mean, I'm thinking it's going to have more in it than just the stuff that they had in the the adventure anthology.
So we'll see. But I'll have a link to both the Kickstarter for the Monster Vault 2 and for the announcement about the Old Margreave book. Because at least I'm interested in them.
Yeah, I am too. We didn't intend on doubling up on kobolds, especially not as like both of us are honorary gnomes.
Damn kobolds.
However, we did manage to both come up with our own downtime recommendations that have to do with Kobold Press. The one I wanted to bring up is, this is really interesting. Kobold Press has announced they are going to do Riverbank, the RPG, and it is not crowdfunding yet. It is going to be crowdfunding in the future, and it is described as a cozy RPG of elegant animals, chaos, and whimsy. So this is not going to be a D20 based system. It is not going to be like an action based. Well, it is hijinks based, not so much deadly adventure type. Author Kidge Johnson is going to be doing this. That makes me wonder if Kobold Press is going to start doing something similar to Evil Hat, where they're kind of facilitating people that have their own games that don't necessarily have the resources to put out that game, and helping them, give it the higher polish that they can because they have the contacts for it. It would be really interesting if they did, and I do think it's interesting that they went with, it's still fantasy, but it is much more whimsical fantasy than what they were normally doing. The other thing that's interesting is this is going to be on BackerKit, not Kickstarter. I think part of that is because there are some rules about whether you can run a second Kickstarter while you're still fulfilling another one.
Oh, yeah.
You may say, but Jared, I have seen companies do that. I was like, yes, Kickstarter's not good at enforcing their own rules, but it is a rule. So if you're worried about following rules, that is probably why this is doing that. I've seen a couple other RPG companies do that too, where they'll run one on Kickstarter and one on BackerKit. Now, if this were people that I have not seen produce things before, I would say, ooh, I'm a little worried that they're trying to find a way to crowdfund something without fulfilling this first. But
because we've seen that cause problems before.
Yeah, we have. However, I don't think that's a problem with Kobold Press. Barring some major Ragnarok-like catastrophe, I don't think that's going to be a problem. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
The Heroes of Havel's Way. The Heroes of Havel's Way is an epic fantasy about two young heroes, Odie and Aramon. These heroes have potential to deal with a dire threat from an ancient time that is poised to return to the world. A Titan destroyer, Valhel Morris, the Mountain Strangler, stirs. The fate of the barony of Castican may be in their hands. We play the game to find out and invite you along the journey, and you're probably going to love Monty the raccoon more than anybody else.
That sounds exciting. I hope we get to play that again soon.
I hope so too. I believe Chris said new episodes for that are going to start dropping in February.
Hooray! We have used up all of our resources, so it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you. We hope you'll explore with us when we start our next adventure.